Started already. So hey everyone. Mm, I thought that it's too bad that um, that not everyone, especially women that are very active in this initiative, can make it today because I wanted to discuss the need and viability of getting JSON API in core sooner rather than later. That is discussing 8.5 versus 8.6 and what are the blockers, and if we can do it, what needs to happen, and if we cannot, what needs to happen in order to make it to 8.6. And just a little bit of brainstorming. I guess that we'll do this again soon with everyone involved. But this was prompted by Angie's comment in the include the experimental module in JSON API in core, saying, "Hey, what up with this?" And I don't know actually. So, gonna share some thoughts, and hopefully someone else will have all the thoughts too. The first thing is that there is a parallel initiative that I think that Daniel is very familiar with, which is about building newer and better UIs. And at the moment, there is only an issue to do some experimentation with the DB log screen, which incidentally is not exposed via JSON API. But I think that just hints the need to build better UIs like across the board, and then we will need to use things like JSON API, because it's not just log entries that are not related to anything else in the system. It's just a single isolated table that gets records, right? In other cases like field config, field display settings, or please allow just the thought of views UI. Better UIs for those could be understandably in a roadmap. So for that, I think that it would be good to have some more advanced API servers like JSON API in comparison to REST core. So there is that. I think that there is some value in having that soon to empower that initiative. Daniel, do you have? I know that you've been experimenting with this and you have thoughts about it.
So I think there are a lot of problems we need to talk about. One thing I would really ask first: should we target towards having a stable version in or not a stable version? Then
Yeah,
there is
fair.
Then there's the question. I mean, at least for the better UI part, the main feature we need is, well, either support for all those esoteric things like dblog, the modules, the permissions on the page, all this kind of special things. Because we will probably not build a better editor UI, at least at the moment, because there was already a lot of effort in making that not the worst. Unlike many other admin pages, which really lag behind. And well, so personally, at least for the better, it's called JS Framework Initiative, I believe. The API side is sort of not that important, because the tricky bits are not integrating with some HTTP API, but rather all the other things around it. What does a module do? Or what should a module be able to do, right? Because in classical Drupal, a module can replace the rendering of any page. stuff like that. I think that's where the tricky bit. And I kind of hope that we don't block ourselves on having a perfect config REST API or config JSON API support, but rather, in quotes, treat it as experimental and expose something just exactly what we need for the UI, even that won't be the final product.
Okay, so as I understand this, and maybe I misunderstand it, but the TS framework initiative.
Can you mute yourself, Daniel?
Yeah, sorry.
There we go.
So if I understood that correctly, the JS Framework Initiative is not targeting the idea of empowering end users to provide a JS framework inside of Drupal. Oh, I guess that question is now to the open. But to just be able to provide better admin UIs, and it doesn't affect building the Drupal sites more integrated with the internal APIs. Okay, I think that I kind of answered myself there. So if we don't need to build better UI, if we don't need the API to build better UIs, that means that everything is kind of shipped with Drupal and not like a separate admin UI, which is a React app, whatever, that communicates with a Drupal. Then I guess that we don't need to worry about that initiative, right? Is that what you're getting at?
So what I try to say is that, sorry for this noise. What I try to say is that we don't necessarily need it, right, as in a blocker. But on the long run, in order to play API first, we should, of course, totally use the proper tools, right? And one of them will be probably JSON API for something.
Right. Yeah. I think I get it, and I sort of agree. Like, if these better UIs are not going to be a separate app, but still the Drupal app that renders via JavaScript framework, then the HTTP API that JSON API offers is not critical, anyways.
Yeah, it's for example also what we talked about. So how do we handle authentication? We don't actually have to do anything special. We use cookies. Yeah, I think simplifying the problem space is not a bad idea.
Okay, so
but on the other hand, I think for actual sites, it would be really valuable to have JSON API exposed by default, or at least available.
Right, and that kind of goes into the second point I wanted to say. So I guess that the first point, unless anyone else here disagrees, we can say that there is not much value in having JSON API in core to help the other initiative. Does anyone object to that?
I think as long as they're focused on the DB logs, that's the case. But if they started to do something more related to entities, maybe even some configuration stuff, I would agree with that statement.
Okay, so we don't worry right now about that. Yeah. So the second point that Daniel introduced is, what about site builders or site owners, like people actually creating a site for a client or for themselves, whoever they need to? Is that interesting for them? And is it important that this is in core as opposed to in contrib? I have I have thoughts about that, and I think that it could live in contrib. If it lives in contrib, then it will never be used for things like Ajax interactions inside of Drupal core, right? And that would be like the best way to dog food is to have an API effort that is like consistent and coherent and that is well documented, etc., that we use internally, not necessarily or not only necessarily for admin UIs based in this new framework initiative, but just sometimes Ajax responses that do go through HTTP. So this is my point. I kind of, I'm ambivalent here. I don't feel strongly about, this could perfectly live in contrib. It has been living in contrib. People have been using it very well. And I think that Splashcast shared a site today that proves that, like an e-commerce site with, decoupled using JSON API and authentication, etc. So contrib versus core. For site owners. Who has thoughts?
I used to be.
I think the classical Drupal.
Go ahead, Daniel.
The classical Drupal developers, in quotes, they will not have a problem finding this API module. I think they will have. They are so used to like download tens of content modules to do their thing, and I think just downloading JSON API as well isn't really much of a problem for them. What I think having something like JSON API into core is more of an like marketing / evaluation step, where like that Drupal can build decoupled because it ships with something like that. So my argument is not on the feature side. It's more like convincing deciders to like go with Drupal because you don't need to do anything to get it. Like
right.
Some kind of API.
So let me restate that, hoping to elaborate on that idea. So would it be a fair representation of what you said to say Drupal is already shipping with an API server, and we don't think that is the best for building decoupled sites? So we should do a best effort. If we are going to say, hey, Drupal core provides an API server, we should do a best effort to provide something that is more usable out of the box, regardless of if you could do it or not using contrib, and just ignore what's inside of core, because we are advertising Drupal as providing an API solution out of the box. Is that a fair representation? Not sure if you're speaking because you're muted, or maybe you're out of range.
I thought it was a fair representation.
Okay, I tend to agree with that. We have this kind of idea in Drupal 8 that it comes with batteries included, and those batteries may be half trained because it's very hard and low performance to build it. Only like to build complex decoupled applications with only REST core. I think that you can do a lot of stuff, like custom stuff. Like again, to come back to that example that Splashka built, like when you have to do complex logic in clearing or processing a line item in a cart in a Drupal commerce in a decoupled application, maybe REST can offer the customized endpoint that you need, right? But in the day-to-day interactions of exposing entities and interacting with them, REST is not the best solution, and we want that batteries include to be like 100% full batteries. Anyone else has feelings around this? Going to write down this point, if not.
I tend to agree with all of that.
Okay. So that is the second point, and there was.
I would like to bring up again the point of should.
Oh, we've lost you, Daniel. I think what he was maybe going to bring up is whether it should be experimental or stable.
Yeah, sorry for my connection. Yeah, stable or experimental.
So as of today, we don't have many bugs. I think that we still need to iron out maybe some of the things that we improved in that big patch that we committed recently with Gabe's work, and there's just one issue that may be or maybe not related to that, and that config entities through nested fields lose context somewhere, right? We haven't identified where. But that being said, it feels like, at least for contrib standards, it's pretty stable. I don't know if you would agree with that. Daniel and Gabe are both co-maintainers of this. And I also know that Jingxiang has been using the module extensively. So to me, it feels stable as a contrib module, but I don't know what that means for Drupal core.
I think it's stable for contrib. I would personally like to see it as experimental in core before we put it in as stable, just because I think it's going to probably significantly increase the adoption rate, and I'd like to have at least one release cycle to try and find any bugs, make sure that we've kind of got the abstractions right, just to give us a little bit window of opportunity to make some changes if we have to.
I just want to add something really quick. I have been using JSON API with Java front end, with Node.js, with PHP front end. There's one issue I always run into, but I haven't been able to constantly reproduce, is the caching issue. So, I mean, from my Java application, PHP and Node.js, sometimes I always run, like, there's a weird cached. Some authentication was cached with JSON API. I wasn't sure it was the problem from JSON API, but there was a weird bug that I haven't been able to reproduce constantly.
Those are hard to chase. There is a patch that kind of addresses a caching issue that gets cleared too often than necessary through the use of a trait, but I'm not sure if that may or may not fix that. Yeah. Stability, it's a concept that is like a little bit subjective to everyone. I tend to agree to what Gabe says, and what I think that Jingxiang here is kind of hinting as well, that maybe we need that cycle of experimentation and see, okay, let's add it, let's be tentative about this, let's add it as experimental, and then have it move fast to stable.
One other aspect of stable in core, it's not only that it doesn't have bugs, the module, but it's also about whether the extension points are well defined and what is an API, and should JSON API have any kind of PHP APIs, or would be only like JSON API via HTTP. Like, where, like, where, to which regard can we refactor it, and what is like exposed as an API. I think that's something which is not 100% clear, I guess.
Right. So I think that we can use JSON API extras as a way to exercise those integration points. And at the moment, that is just what is implicit in the module. And to me, that is all the services, especially normalizers, and the what's it called? The contacts negotiator, the resource type. Those services, like all services that are declared there, those are all overridable, and those need to be like very well defined. And then the HTTP API. Anything else should be internal to me. I think that we are lucky in the sense that the features of the JSON API module feel like very self-contained or very well contained and defined, and anything beyond customizations of shape or some interactions which are controlled via those services that I was mentioning, like anything else should be just internal, considered plumbing, not porcelain.
Yeah, I'll just give you a +1. I'd like to keep as much as we can marked internal, and try and eliminate as much as we can as from being kind of leaked. Like, I think in a way our normalizers almost leak out. And expose APIs that if ideally we wouldn't expose.
Sorry, I'm taking notes. Very slow at this.
I remember, I think it was Damien McKenna dropped in the JSON API channel a few months ago, and he was trying to reach into JSON API and use it to serialize entities so that he could post them somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And I have a feeling that once we put this in core, people will have an even greater sense of like implied stability, and they're going to start reaching in, and even though we've marked things as internal, they're going to start depending on it.
Right.
And I feel like we would be safe to deprecate those things, I mean, by the letter of the law, but I don't know if we'll feel as confident making changes.
Mm-hmm. No, totally. That is why after that need of posting to S3, she realized JSON API entities was requested. There was a service that was created, and that was intentionally made a service, so people could kind of interact with it. I would consider these kind of things more of a, okay, the internals can do this. We know that the internals can do this. You can either create a contrib that creates that feature, or you can do a new request for a feature that does this into Drupal core. Either way, I think like if we provide that feature, probably making it a service is usually a good approximation to the problem, I think. And if it goes to script, then that's fine too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, yeah. Any thoughts about defining the API surface as proposing to define the API surface as services plus HTTP API and the JSON API specification in particular?
No more thoughts about that.
Okay, no objections. I don't think I have any more thoughts other than like a polled vote of 8.5 or 8.6, given that around January. And bear in mind that there are Christmas vacation that many people in the Drupal project take in the middle. So the feature freeze is January for 8.5 or then 8.6, and that goes 6 months after. So there is like this feeling of now-ish, or it's like in a long time that this goes in. So with that in mind, anyone wants to just do cold vote?
As much as I hate to, I would rather say 8.6, but
okay,
we keep postponing.
So, in case, well, I also now more think about 8.6, especially because we would need to find a committer, like a framework maintainer, like basically now who has the time to work on this. And I somehow doubt that, yeah.
I know that yesterday Francesco was appointed as core committer. Maybe this could be his pet project. I don't know. That would be awesome. But I'm kind of interested more in what you would like it, Daniel, rather than what do you think that's going to happen? Like, if we ask for 8.5, but there is this problem of resources and people not being able to pay the attention that this issue deserves, then that's going to go in 8.6 anyways, right? But what do you feel if that consideration was off the table? You can say I don't know.
Well, I think just the question of people asking, oh, shouldn't we just like go with GraphQL now that it will be stable? You know what I mean? Like, I think there will be so many questions coming up that the time till January is too short. But I think we should act as if it would be 8.5 in order to not spend another half a year. Because that easily happens if we look at media in core. That also took forever.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I'm kind of in that boat too. I mean, I'm not a clear 8.5. I'm a kind of, let's see what it happens, but let's target 8.5. And especially if we're going to go with experimental first. If this slips to 8.6, then my feelings about making it experimental first kind of are a little bit unclear. Like maybe if we go to 8.6, I would like to make it stable right away. I don't know. But yeah, those were my points. Is there anything that anyone else wants to share or debate? No?
No, thank you.
All right. This was a great meeting. Thank you, everyone.
See ya. Thanks for doing this.